I knew they were going to fire me. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd already buried the company's future in a place they'd never reach, and I was about to walk out with the shovel after 15 years at Neuralink Dynamics. I walked into the small glass-walled conference room on the top floor, like it was any other meeting, but the air was too still, too controlled. Celia Marlowe sat across from me, Senior Vice President, Strategic Operations. Beside her was Irene Walsh from HR, notebook closed, but already knowing what she'd write. Celia's voice was syrupy smooth. "Eleanor, thanks for coming in." I knew the lines by heart. I'd read the draft in an email thread they didn't mean to send me. "We're restructuring your position," she continued, folding her hands. "The company is moving in a new direction," Irene added, "and your contributions have been deeply appreciated." She slid a manila folder across the table. I didn't touch it. It would contain the standard package: 2 weeks' pay for every year I'd given them, 3 months of health coverage, and a list of job search resources I would never use. "I understand," I said calmly. Celia looked briefly confused, then relieved. Irene offered a professional smile, already reaching for her checklist. "We'll need your badge, laptop, and phone by Friday." Celia leaned forward slightly. "You'll have until the end of the week to clear your desk." There was no mention of my team, no acknowledgement that the algorithm powering their flagship platform had come from me, only quiet triumph, hidden under corporate politeness. I stood. "Is there anything else?" They both shook their heads. I smiled, then walked out. Not angry, not afraid, just ready. No one noticed me in the elevator or in the lobby. I walked past the security desk without even a glance. Back in my apartment, I placed the envelope from Irene next to the coffee machine, untouched, unopened. It would stay there, a monument to someone else's ending. Mine was different. I opened my personal laptop, disconnected from the company's VPN, and accessed the encrypted archive I had created 2 months ago. Inside were the files, not stolen, not proprietary, just mine, because the algorithm they were now selling to half the Fortune 500 had been written 2 years earlier, by me, on my time, on my machine, in the middle of the night, after the panic attacks made sleep impossible. Celia had found it in an internal review and pitched it as a company innovation. I'd watched her present my work, my architecture, my sequence logic, my name stripped from the Git history, to the board. They gave her a bonus. I got burnout, and still, I stayed. Until now, my backup plan wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Every framework I had built, every diagram I had authored, every line of pseudocode that predated my contract, archived, authenticated, time-stamped. I hadn't broken a single rule, but I knew which ones they had. The next morning, I sent one email, not to Neuralink, to Parallax Systems, their biggest competitor. The subject line was simple: "Let's talk." By noon, I had a meeting on the calendar. By Friday, an offer, double my old salary, full IP credit, and a team, mine, people who had burned out under Celia's micromanagement, people who still believed in what we were building, before the board decided it was more profitable to rebrand us as a data services vendor. I signed the contract. On the same morning, Neuralink announced a product delay. Due to technical challenges, Celia's name was conspicuously absent from the press release. The email she sent me 2 weeks later went unread. I was too busy building again, this time with my name on the door. Julian lifted his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. I raised mine to meet his saying, "and to owning your value." The deal was done. The press release would go out Monday. Until then, everything stayed quiet, controlled, strategic. The patent paperwork had already been filed under my name the previous month. Unlike the original version built at Neuralink, this new iteration was mine alone, developed on my own equipment, off the clock, refined, optimized, and documented in obsessive detail, with timestamps, with logs, with video walkthroughs of every module. Neuralink had missed their chance to file. Brandon called it an internal oversight. He said legal would handle it, but I didn't trust them. So I moved first. I filed the patent myself, and now Axion Core owned the exclusive license. The trap had already been baited. All that remained was for them to walk into it. Thursday passed, in a blur of closed-door meetings and quiet goodbyes. I didn't tell anyone what was coming. Not yet. Not Leo, my lead developer. Not Nadia or Josh, or Priya from QA. They would know soon enough. For now, I focused on leaving clean. I documented every module I'd touched, left behind crystal clear notes, not out of courtesy, but to prove I had nothing to hide. Everything I had built at Neuralink stayed behind. What they didn't know, the best version of the algorithm, the one that would reshape the industry, never touched a company server. Not once. Friday morning, I arrived early. The office was still half dark. When I dropped my badge, laptop, and phone at Irene's desk, she smiled tightly. "We appreciate your professionalism," she said. I nodded, then walked past the executive hallway. One last time. I didn't look in. Monday morning arrived like a thunderclap. At exactly 7. Man. Axion Core's press release went live. Elena Marquez, named Chief Innovation Officer. Axion Core acquires exclusive rights to Marquez distributed algorithm. By A12. It had been reposted by 3 major tech news outlets. By A47. The first analyst call mentioned Neuralink's exposure. By 9:00. Their stock had already dipped 6%. At 9:15, a message buzzed across my private line. It was from Leo. "Complete chaos here. What did you do?" I typed a single reply. "Check your personal email." 2 minutes later, he responded, "You planned this?" I didn't answer. He already knew the truth. At 9:45, Brandon Hale emailed me directly. Subject line, "Let's talk. Elena, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Please call me." I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Axion Core's legal department by 10:30. 3 more emails came in from Neuralink addresses. One from legal, one from their interim PR rep, one from Celia. They wanted to clarify rights. They wanted to collaborate on communication. They wanted to contain the fire. But the fire had already spread. By noon, Neuralink's largest client paused its contract. By 3:00 p.m. Another followed. Both were in talks with Axion Core by sundown. Brandon still hadn't figured it out. The algorithm wasn't the only thing I'd taken with me. So was the trust. That night, Julian and I reviewed the day's fallout over a bottle of Syrah in his office. "They're hemorrhaging," he said, scrolling through the financial news feed. 3 analysts downgraded their rating in a single day. I nodded. Calm. This is just phase 1. Julian raised an eyebrow. "There's more." I turned my laptop to face him. A map of connection logs glowed on the screen, highlighted in red. One flagged IP address in Estonia. They tried to access our build server this morning. I said. Julian stared at the screen. From one of their satellite offices, routed through a proxy. Sloppy. He leaned back in his chair. "They're not even hiding it." "No," I said, "because they think they can still win." Julian smiled. "Then let's give them what they want." I smiled back. "They won't know the difference until it's too late." By noon the next day, Axion Core's security team had deployed the decoy. A mirrored environment. Identical file names. Identical architecture. But the algorithm inside wasn't real. It was a shell, a beautifully designed, completely hollow system, laced with trackers, laced with logic loops that would appear functional until stress testing began. And if someone was foolish enough to deploy it at scale, it would implode, quietly, efficiently, and absolutely. That afternoon, the Estonian IP logged in again. They downloaded everything. Julian watched the logs in silence. They just sealed their own fate, he said. No, I replied. They volunteered for it, inside Neuralink. Panic looked a lot like overconfidence. Brandon convened his executive team in the boardroom. He paced in front of a screen, showing competitor metrics. We still have market share, he snapped. We'll launch early, get ahead of Axion Core. Celia exchanged a look with the new CTO, Patrick something, brought in just 2 weeks earlier. Patrick nodded confidently. We reviewed the new build. It passed all surface checks. Brandon didn't ask who built it, didn't ask where it came from. He wanted a win. He wanted it fast. We go live in 72 hours, he said. No one objected. No one had time. The iceberg was coming, and none of them saw it. That weekend, I drove north. No laptop, no Wi-Fi, just silence, and my father's old workshop, tucked into the hills above Sonoma. The space was just as he'd left it. Wood panels, metal shavings on the bench, schematics pinned to corkboard, yellowed with age. I opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, his handwriting on the front. Eleanor, for when they try to erase you. Inside was a letter. One sentence stood out. Don't fight them to stay in their system. Build your own. I stood in the quiet for a long time. Then I smiled. He'd known. Even then, this was legacy. Not what you inherit, but what you finish. Monday. Launch day. At 2:03 p.m. Neuralink deployed their update. Clients were notified. The system refreshed. For 10 minutes, everything seemed normal. Then the threads began to fray. Invoices wouldn't save. Reporting dashboards froze. User access collapsed in waves. At 2:17 p.m., the recursive logic loop activated. It duplicated data until servers choked, then began erasing it, one by one. At 2:34, Neuralink's internal team shut everything down. But it was too late. Data was gone, trust was gone, and Brandon Hale's voice was nowhere to be heard. By 3:30 p.m., social media lit up with client outrage. Screenshots of error messages, contract cancellations, executive tags. At 3:45, Neuralink's legal department issued a statement. We are investigating unexpected issues in the latest update. They didn't mention the stolen algorithm. They didn't mention me. But everyone knew. By 4:30, Brandon was no longer CEO. The board had called an emergency vote. Celia was placed on administrative leave. The new interim CEO was Richard Chang, someone I didn't know. But I suspected I'd be hearing from him soon, very soon. That evening, I sat in my new office at Axion Core. The sun dipped low across the skyline. My team worked 2 floors below, setting up new workspaces, laughing like it was the first day of summer. It was the first time in years I felt clear. Whole. Julian walked in holding 2 glasses. They're calling it the fastest executive collapse in recent memory, he said. Not fast, I replied. Just overdue. He handed me a glass. To the long game. We clinked glasses. Outside, the city buzzed with headlines. Inside, we were just getting started. The next morning, an email came from the Department of Defense. It was brief. We request a conversation regarding recent software implications. Julian read it over my shoulder. They're not wasting time. I nodded. They've seen what the algorithm can do. He looked at me. Are you ready to go federal? I didn't hesitate. As long as I write the terms. He grinned. That sounds like the Elena I hired. 2 days later, I walked into a windowless conference room in Washington, D.C. 3 men in military uniforms sat across from me. 2 women in suits. No name badges. A laptop was open in the center of the table. They didn't ask small talk. They pulled up a simulation, distributed drone coordination, real-time battlefield adjustments. My algorithm ran at the core. I hadn't written it for war, but it adapted frighteningly well. Did you intend for this to be dual use? One of them asked. No, I said, but I documented everything. They nodded. That was what they really cared about. Control, and attribution. They made the offer, before I left the room, a classified partnership, dual lab access, oversight, but autonomy. Julian and I reviewed the terms that night. They want access, he said, but they're giving you protection. They want the code, I replied, but they're willing to let me keep the credit. We both knew that was rare. Powerful agencies didn't like giving up control, but they couldn't replicate what I'd built, and they didn't trust Neuralink to try again. This was leverage, and I planned to use it wisely. Back at Axion Core, the team was thriving. Leo, Nadia, Josh, Priya, Marcus, and Diego. Every one of them had accepted offers. Higher pay, better titles, real respect. In our new lab, whiteboards were already covered in sketches, modular expansions, cross-platform syncing, ideas I'd never had the space to explore before. This wasn't just a new job. It was the lab I'd always needed. Julian walked in holding coffee. They want to keynote, he said. National Summit. You'd open. I smiled. Time to rewrite the narrative. The summit was held at a convention center just outside D.C. Hundreds of attendees, executives, developers, policymakers. I waited backstage. As they introduced me, Elena Marquez, Chief Innovation Officer, Axion Core Technologies. I walked out under the lights. Applause rose, but I didn't smile. I stood at the podium and looked straight ahead. I'm not here to talk about tech. I'm here to talk about ownership and what happens when it's stolen. The room went quiet. Finally, I spent 15 years building in silence. I said, code no one credited me for, papers where my name came second, or not at all. And when I was no longer useful to their narrative, they cut me out. I let the silence stretch, then continued. But what they didn't know was this. I built 2 versions, one for them and one for me. And the second one, it changed everything. They didn't just lose code. They lost the foundation of their future, because I walked out with it. After the keynote, the line to speak with me was longer than I expected. Young engineers, VCs, 3 different think tank representatives. One young woman, barely out of college, said softly, I didn't know people like us could fight back. I looked her in the eye. You can. You just have to document everything. She nodded, gripping her notebook like it was armor. That moment stayed with me, long after the applause faded, long after the lights went down. Because this time, I hadn't just told the story. I'd owned it. 2 days later, I received a letter, official seal, return address, Department of Defense. Inside was a formal agreement, Joint Innovation Lab, Axion Core listed as exclusive tech partner, and me named lead architect. Julian read it twice. They put it in writing, he said. They had to, I replied. Their future infrastructure depends on it. We both knew what that meant. Not just contracts, not just funding, influence, and protection. Real, legal, long-term protection. The kind Neuralink never gave. The kind I'd earned. That night, I got an unexpected email from Brandon Hale, sent from a personal Gmail account. Subject, Conversation. Eleanor, I think we lost sight of what really mattered. If there's any way to move forward, I'd like to talk. It was pathetic. After everything, after the silence, after the theft, I stared at the screen for a full minute, then typed one line. You mistook silence for weakness, and I hit delete. A week later, the fallout continued. Neuralink's client losses reached critical mass. Their board issued a formal apology, but not to me, to investors, to partners, to the public, but the industry saw through it. Axion Core's inbox flooded with integration requests. Julian set up a dedicated intake team. We couldn't keep up. Congratulations, he said, placing a thick folder on my desk. We're the new standard. I looked at the cover. Projected market lead. 12 months. Let's make it 6, I said. Meanwhile, Leo was unraveling. The internal audit had caught something strange. A cloned repos, time-stamped 3 weeks. Before I filed my patent, same structure, same core logic, except it wasn't complete. It was sloppy, like someone tried to replicate my work, but didn't understand the architecture. Julian called me into his office. He copied it. I nodded, but he couldn't finish it. And he tried to sell it, Julian added, to a Neuralink affiliate in Singapore. My jaw tightened. So that's why they thought they had a claim. We confronted Leo the next morning. He didn't deny it. I needed a safety net, he said, in case this didn't work out. You mean in case I failed? I replied. He shrugged. It was just business. No, I said quietly. It was betrayal. Legal moved fast. Contract breach. Intellectual property violation. Attempted fraud. By the end of the week, Leo was gone. His badge deactivated. His desk cleared. His LinkedIn account deleted. Some mistakes. You don't come back from. And some bridges. You only burn once. I sat alone in my office that night. The city lights blinked below. The lab was quiet. Julian had gone home. The team was out celebrating another milestone. But I stayed behind. I pulled out a small, flat box from the bottom drawer. Inside was a folded letter, yellowed at the edges. My father's handwriting across the top. To Elena, when you finally build something they can't take. I unfolded it slowly. There were schematics, hand-drawn node maps, notes on distributed logic. He had the idea, but not the tools. Now, I had both. I laid the pages out across the desk, side by side with my own sketches. They aligned, decades apart, and we had drawn the same paths. He had started something in the 80s, an early concept, something he called node ring, an architecture for resilience, self-healing logic. Back then, it was theory, but now it was real. I wasn't just building a platform. I was completing his design. His legacy lived in every line of my code. I hadn't just walked away with an algorithm. I walked away with a blueprint for the future. The next phase moved fast. Axion Core finalized the government contract. We opened a dual-purpose lab outside Langley, part commercial, part classified. My team transitioned seamlessly. Half worked on enterprise systems, the other half on secure infrastructure for defense. I split my time between both, designing, testing, protecting. Julian let me lead. He trusted me, not just with code, but with vision. And for the first time in my career, no one stood over my shoulder. No one erased my name. No one called me replaceable. 6 months later, we deployed the first system built entirely on my next-gen framework. It was faster, smarter, self-auditing, self-correcting. Clients called it magic. I called it overdue. Tech blogs called it the algorithm that rebuilt the industry. One magazine ran a headline I clipped and framed, From Erased to Essential. How Elena Marquez redefined ownership. I didn't do interviews. I let the work speak. But I kept the headline, not out of vanity, but because for the first time, it was true, and they spelled my name right. One night, I stayed late in the lab. Just me, the hum of servers, and a screen full of compiled results. I pulled up the patent registry, typed in a name, Arturo Marquez. My father. Only one entry appeared, node ring, filed, never finalized, abandoned after funding was cut. I sat back. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I added it, a new patent, node ring, reconstructed, inventors, Arturo Marquez, Elena Marquez, 2 names, same signature, one legacy, finally complete. The official filing went through in under 2 weeks. The confirmation email came just before midnight. I stared at it on my screen, then shut my laptop. I didn't need to read it again. It was done. I walked outside into the cool night air. The city was quiet. The stars were faint but present. For the first time in decades, I wasn't chasing recognition. I wasn't defending my place. I had claimed it. On paper, in code, and in history. The next morning, Julian greeted me with a grin. "You made the front page again," he said, handing over a folded paper. I skimmed the headline, Marquez Files, Joint Patent Honoring Father's 1986 Design. There was a photo of me from the summit, standing at the podium, focused, unapologetic. I set the paper down. "Good photo," Julian joked. "I've looked worse," I said. But what I thought was, I've never looked more like myself. Later that week, I received a message from Richard Chang, Neuralink's interim CEO. Polite, professional, cautious. "We'd like to meet." He wrote, "We are prepared to acknowledge your authorship and negotiate a licensing agreement." I read it twice, then forwarded it to Julian without comment. His reply came in seconds. Phase 1, complete. I didn't reply. I just smiled. Because I already knew. That wasn't the end. It was just the reset. The lab buzzed louder each day. More contracts, more hires, more momentum. But I kept my team small, focused, tight-knit. They knew the story. They knew the stakes. And they knew we weren't just writing software anymore. We were setting precedent. For every engineer who'd been sidelined, for every idea that was stolen, for every name that got erased, we were putting them back, line by line, block by block, and this time, we were making it stick. At our next internal summit, I gave a talk to the new recruits, not about code, not about tech, about truth. "Write everything down," I said. "Keep your records. Timestamp your work. Save your drafts. Not because you're paranoid, but because someday you might need to prove you were first." They nodded. Some took notes. Some just stared. They didn't need to believe it today. They'd understand when it mattered, like I had. Months passed. Axion Core overtook Neuralink in valuation. Quietly, cleanly, without shouting. We just worked. The market noticed. One day, Julian walked into my office holding a bottle of champagne. He didn't say a word, just pointed at the ticker on the screen. Axion Core, $127, 8 billions. Neuralink, $126, 4 billions. I raised an eyebrow. He popped the cork. No speeches, no toasts, just a long exhale from both of us. It was done, and we'd done it our way. That night, I stood alone on the rooftop. The city stretched in every direction. I thought about all the hours, all the code, all the silence, and the noise that followed. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even proud. I was something better, certain of what I'd built, of who I'd become, of what it meant to stay, to fight, and to win without losing yourself. Before I left the rooftop, I checked my messages one last time. A new one had arrived. From a young developer I'd met at the summit. Just 2 lines. Today I filed my first patent. Thanks for making space. I stared at the screen for a while, then typed back. You didn't need me to make space. You just needed someone to show you it was yours all along. She replied with a heart and a screenshot of her filing. Her name, bold and clear. It was beautiful. The next morning, I arrived at the lab early. The lights were still off. The servers hummed like a heartbeat. I poured a cup of coffee, sat at my desk, opened a fresh document. A blank screen stared back, and I smiled. Because I wasn't starting over. I was building forward, on a foundation I claimed, with a name they couldn't erase. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what they can't take from you. And this one, they'll never touch again.